So let's get started with the topic today. Today I want to talk with you mostly about puzzles and explanations. So let's see, maybe we find something else as well, maybe talk about something else afterwards, but puzzles and explanations, that's our main topic for today. So before we start, please take out your phones. Take out your computer, whatever you have to connect to the internet these days. Go to the website and answer the question. Okay, well, I should know you know these kind of things. You're clever because you went to sociological analysis and research design last year. I know that because I designed that bloody module. So you guys came up with the right answer here. However, normally when I ask that question and people haven't been to sociological analysis and research design the previous year, they never come up with the idea that the Vatican has the highest crime rate, right? And maybe for those of you who are new at UCD, for the master's students, who wonder, what the hell, what's happening here? Well, actually, we'll talk about that in a second. But that's sort of something that we would call a puzzle. How can that be? Yeah? Why does the Vatican have apparently the highest crime rate of all those countries? Yeah, it's actually incredibly high. Think about it, but actually there's a simple solution to that. So as I said, I want to talk about puzzles first. And then I want to talk about explanations. So let's talk about puzzles. A puzzle is essentially a very good starting point for sociological research. A puzzle is not just a general topic, like, I don't know, the effect of gender on wages. Well, actually, we know that females get lower salaries than males for exactly the same work, unfortunately. But that is not a puzzle by itself. A puzzle is a well-established explanandum for which there is no well-established explanation. Right? It's something that is there. We observe it in the real world. It's well-established. It's not just a fluke. Right? It's there. But we don't really have a good explanation for it yet. For example, a correlation which defies the expectation of common sense or the predictions of some theory. Something that is odd, something that strikes you. And these are the kind of things that as sociologists you should be immediately excited about. I'm so excited about these unexpected things because they allow me to look at it closer, which might allow me to uncover something about society that we did not know before. And the best puzzles, like one of my mentors that I had in the UK at the time, Diego Gambetta, he's an amazing guy. He's one of those mind-blowing guys you listen to and he just flips your world around, right? You just listen to the guy and you thought something goes in one way and suddenly he turns it around in the simplest possible way and you have one of those wow moments. Yeah? So anyway, so he used to be a professor in Oxford. He's now at the European University Institute in Florence. But he always said, the best puzzles are the ones which seem outlandish at first. But once you kind of look more closely at it, they put our theories to the test and reveal something of unexpected importance. And that's where you see why these puzzles are so exciting from a sociological point of view, because they really allow us to put our theories to test and to find something out about the social world that we did not know before. So puzzles, there's often something a little odd. Something looks a little strange. Right? Okay, a puzzle can be theoretical in nature. That means something in the literature just doesn't make sense. Right? Or there's something in the literature in the real world, it's not like that. Yeah? Or two theories, the one would say that, but the other one says something completely different. Right? So, for example, one phenomena that we will talk about later on during this term, partly also because I do research about it, it's called the friendship paradox, which is this really weird thing that your friends tend to have on average more friends than you have. It's really strange. But it's actually logically true. It has to be like that. When you take a random person and you take a random friend of that random person, the second person is not random anymore. Actually, that person is more likely to be better connected. And actually, I did some research which shows that that random friend of a random person is also more likely to be more attractive, to be healthier, and be nicer than the random person. Which is really strange, right? So you take a random person and you take a random friend of that person. I like to kind of give that talk in front of established folks where I say, I'm sorry guys, but your friends have more friends than you have. Anyway, so that's kind of like also a little puzzling thing that we have, or where it kind of conflicts with other theoretical ideas. But puzzles can also be empirical. Empirical means like some observations just don't make sense with our current understanding. Okay? It's something that we observe out there that is not in line with what we would have expected based on our theories or based on our previous knowledge. Let me give you a couple of examples for puzzles, and then afterwards I'm going to outline a strategy about how we can think and how we can make sense of these puzzles and make an explanation. So one puzzle that we do observe is that everywhere in the world, men are more likely to commit suicide than women, or to be precise, the success rate of men is higher than for women. The attempts is a different story, but let's say when men try to commit suicide, they are much more likely to be successful than women. That holds almost everywhere in the world, except in China. So in China, it's the reverse. Why the hell in China, right? So I don't have an explanation for this, I don't know, but that's a puzzle, right? There's something where now you as a social scientist, you have a great starting point to think about that. And as you'll see later on, immediately once you kind of get questions like that, your head needs to start spinning and you need to think about possible explanations for this, right? You immediately need to come up with at least 2, 3, 4 good explanations for this, and then the work starts. Another puzzle, which is a little weird. Why are there so many Islamic terrorists with degrees in engineering and so few with degrees in Islamic studies? You would think those guys are fundamentalists, But somehow, Islamic studies scholars are not overly represented amongst Islamic terrorists as we could expect. Again, I don't have an explanation for that. Actually, there's a book by the aforementioned Diego Gambetta, great guy, he also writes in a very nice way. He calls his book The Engineers of Jihad, came out with Princeton University Press, I think 2 years ago. So if you're kind of interested in that question, have a look at Diego's book. Another puzzle that we observe is, why do average IQ scores increase by 3 points every 10 years? And if you add that up, that means like the generation of your parents, like on average now people are so much more intelligent compared to the generation of your parents, or of your generation of your grandparents. Actually, it's so strong that IQ tests need to be updated every 10 years, because otherwise they would give a really wrong impression about what's going on. Actually, in the literature, this is called the Flynn Effect. It's more a thing in psychology, but it's interesting for us nevertheless. So if you're interested in that, there are a couple of explanations for that. You get great lectures, you get stuff recorded, you have, all sorts of learning materials nowadays that your parents didn't have, that your grandparents didn't have. These are all sorts of explanations, but at the end of the day, it's still a bloody puzzle. Or one of my favorite puzzles is this one. Why does India, with 1.2 billion citizens, never win any medals at the Olympic Games? Did you ever think about that? It's like so many people there, right? And then you look at Ireland, which has 4.5 million people, and I can't remember how many medals did Ireland win? I think there was a bronze, wasn't there something like that? Yeah, or like some rowing dude. Yeah, gold, 2 golds. Apparently, Ireland is good in. Yeah, these twins. I heard about them. Yeah, they're really good. But I think these were the medals, right? This was all that Ireland won. And how many medals did India win? We have some folks from India here. Do you remember? Did you win a gold?
Yes.
How many? One. Wow, but Ireland had twins. But you see the point. India has a population which is hundreds of times more than Ireland. It's around 250 times more people, but they win the same amount of gold medals. That's a puzzle. Another one. Why is the highest rate of plastic surgery in the world found in South Korea? Actually, it was even better until a couple of years ago. It used to be Iran. I don't know. Let's just leave it there. Or another puzzle, actually, that's a puzzle that was brought up in one of the readings that you guys actually had to do by your Elster. You know, you all did the readings, because it's the first week, second week, and you're all excited. And he has this really cool puzzle where he kind of observes that he looked at the kind of books that get stolen from the library at the University of Oxford. And he found that most books that were stolen were theology books. That's really strange, right? So maybe I kind of didn't pay attention in my, Religion 101, but isn't there something sad about you shouldn't steal? Huh? But nevertheless, apparently, theology books are stolen the most from the libraries. So these are all puzzles that, as I said, should put your brain in overdrive. Yeah, you should now start really thinking about that, and these are great starting points for research projects. So how do we define puzzles? Well, it is about our experiences. It's about common sense. You go out and you kind of see something in the world. You read about stuff in the news. You pay attention and something strikes you as, hang on, this is odd. Yeah? Or you read something in the literature. Oh, this is odd. Yeah? I read a paper and I think, oh, that's a little strange. Or you come to these lectures and you shall be educated and you shall receive puzzles once in a while, or you just open your bloody eyes. Yeah? So these are sort of different ways of kind of how we kind of get to start with puzzles, but then what do we do with them, right? So the first question you need to ask yourself, is this really a puzzle? And by that we mean establish the facts. Or is this hearsay, or is there something else going on in the background which might be due to measurement, or is it really something that is unexpected when we kind of look at it a little closer? Now coming back to the question that we had here, whoops. Well, we don't see the results, but most of you guys, oh, there we are. Most of you guys said it's the Vatican, and actually it's true. The Vatican has the highest crime rate in the world. But is that actually really a puzzle? Well, as it turns out, the Vatican, it has a population, at least in 2002, that's the time for which I got the last numbers. I don't know how many monks there are right now. I don't know. Visiting priests or stuff, I don't know. Don't care. But in 2002, they had 455 people officially registered as residents, as citizens of the Vatican. Yeah? Vatican counts as its own country within the limits in Rome. If you've ever been there, it's a country by itself. So we have 452 people living there. In 2013, for which I got the numbers for that, is there happen to be around 400 civil offenses on the land of the Vatican. Basically, this is like pickpocket stealing stuff on St. Peter's Square. Right? It happens within the confined limits of the state of the Vatican. So it counts as crimes being registered in that country. We had some other offense, penal offense and whatnot, pickpocketing, shoplifting mostly. And then we calculate crime rate as number of crime per population, and there you go, where we end up with that. So we end up with a crime rate of 87%, or for penal offenses, it's even above 100%, it's 133%, while in contrast to that, the crime rate in Ireland is 5.3%. Right? So in this case, this is not really, this is not really a puzzle. This is not really a puzzle. Okay, let's move on and think about what we do once we kind of actually have a puzzle. Right now, let's assume that we found something that we actually have there, and we establish the fact it's nothing about measurement, it's nothing that we can easily debunk. How can we go and kind of think about an explanation for it? Okay, we have what we want to explain, and that's what we call the explanandum. Yeah? Sometimes it's also our dependent variable. It's what we have here on the right side, the explanandum. And we have the explanans, which is what we use to explain. And in between, we have this mechanism. Yeah? But now you can think of so many different ways how you can get from the one to the other. Normally, there's more than one plausible explanation for something. Yeah. So the real challenge becomes to distinguish between different plausible explanations and try to find out which one is the best of these explanations. And then finally, but that's sort of again like a philosophy of social science 101, we can never actually say for sure if something is true, but we can say for sure if something is wrong. Karl Popper, principle of falsifiability. And so actually the last explanation that is still standing, that's our best candidate. So whatever you think we have as an explanation for how the world works, actually what it is, it's really just the last man standing. It's just the best plausible explanation that we still have that we didn't debunk yet. Now, the whole thing is actually a bit like Mythbusters. You have something, you have different explanations, and you try to bust them once in a while, and then the one that kind of keeps standing, that's the best possible explanation that we have, and if we tested it often enough and it kind of still stands there, we accept that as an explanation at the end of the day. But it still is a theory, it still is just one of the possible explanations that are out there. There could be better ones. It's really weird when you think about it, because all these things we know about the world, we think we have all these rules, all these laws about how, gravity works, all these laws about how electricity works. When you come from a more technical background, it's kind of covered with these kind of things. Everywhere you kind of see, okay, these are the Newton's laws of gravity, of mechanics and shit like that, It's like, when you drop it, it kind of accelerates with that speed. Actually, it's pretty accurate, right? Unless you kind of at some point realize, hang on a moment, once we kind of take the displacement of space-time into account, actually something falls in a different way than what Newton predicted, and then we're suddenly talking about theory of general relativity with Einstein and stuff. But the story is that the explanation how Newton came about with gravity actually stood for quite a long time. And actually, for most cases, it still works just fine. So we accept it, we accept that law, even though it's really just our best possible way of making sense of something that we don't really understand. Okay, we have a puzzle, and now we want to go through different possible explanations and kind of debunk them one after the other somehow. So let's start with a real-world puzzle that we have. And that's a puzzle now that Jon Elster came up with in the reading that you had to do from Nuts and Bolts. It's one of the things that he observes. You have to imagine the guy is like this established professor. Actually, he's one of my heroes. Even though he gives shitty talks, he's pretty boring to listen to. So the few times I've seen him live, I fell asleep. But nevertheless, his writing is brilliant. He's a very sharp mind. So he's not just at Columbia, he also is in Paris at the Sorbonne, and he's this Norwegian dude who happens to be all over the world. But anyway, so his main appointment is at Columbia University in New York. And what established professors do over there, they go to Broadway shows. Yeah? They go to Broadway shows. You know, they've been doing this for quite a long time. So he kind of reflects back on the old days and kind of realizes at some point, hang on, there seem to be more people standing up nowadays after a Broadway show than 20 years ago. Okay, what would we have to do first? First, establish the fact. Is that really true? Okay, now let's just assume that John Elster did his homework and this is a fact. Yeah? That nowadays there are more people standing up in Broadway shows than 20 years ago. So now what I want you to do, now we have a little exercise. You know, I said once in a while we break this up. Now we have a little exercise where I want you to discuss with your neighbor at least 2 possible explanations for this puzzle. Right? So not just one. Give me 2 possible explanations, and then kind of also think about how you could find out which one is better. Okay, so you get 2 minutes, and then we come back. Okay, guys, let's stop. Let's stop. Be quiet. Be quiet. We don't have too much time, but you know, I don't know. What did you guys come up with?
Well, I think Elster.
You read Elster. Yeah? That's a mature student. You already done the homework. Yeah?
I think he basically said that he had this concept of he admitted himself that he didn't actually scientifically work out, go and do surveys. He took impressions from the media and so on. So, the first thing I'd say is that is it a puzzle at all? Did he just make it up?
Okay, so establish the facts. Okay, well, I just said assume he did, right? So now possible explanation.
So then, more reporting.
More reporting.
In recent times.
Yeah.
Maybe more sort of social media.
More social media. So maybe there's not many more people standing up. It's just that more people tweet about it.
Yeah.
You know, that's sort of like, I don't know. Yeah. That's sort of, you see, but there are kind of all sorts of different explanations for it. So how do you actually now go about these kind of things? Well, you find your best explanation that you can think of. And you can be very creative with this. Yeah? You can also kind of base it on the literature that you know. I know there are very good theories about that. They kind of hold in other domains, or you just what makes more sense for you. But then you also find alternative explanations, and this is what, as a sociologist, you always have to do. You immediately start thinking about alternative explanations, and then you start one after the other to knock out these alternatives. That's what you do. And then at the end of the day, you have the last man standing, and that's your best possible explanation that we still live with up to that point in time. So what does Jon Elster come up with? So now what I'm going to do, based on this example, I'm going to walk you through a strategy that he proposes, how we can make an explanation and how we go about it and what are the steps in it. So he comes up with his best possible explanation. And his best possible explanation is that it has to do with the higher ticket price. So his theory is, because he also observes something else, he also observes that, that's the wrong slide. So he comes up with his best possible explanation, which is that it is about the higher ticket price. Sorry, I had the wrong slide, so let me kind of roll back a step and kind of say a few words first about the 5 steps that Jon Elster proposes actually to go about that, right? So he calls that the hypothetical deductive model. If you've been in sociological analysis, research design, and Julia taught what I had taught, I don't know what she taught, to be honest. She did, then you know this. This is sort of the strategy. I think it's a very convincing strategy. It's a great exam question as well. And so he kind of outlines these different steps, and what I'm going to do, I'm now going to walk you through these 5 different steps. So basically the first one is what we now try to do is kind of choose a theory that holds out the greatest promise of a successful explanation. Right? So it's sort of like our best possible idea about why something is the way it is. And as I just mentioned earlier, Jon Elster's best possible explanation is that it has something to do with the ticket price. Well, he observes that not only more people stand up on Broadway shows, actually he also observed that those tickets get more and more expensive over the last 20 years. Yeah? So he's a clever mind. He kind of puts things together and thinks, hang on, maybe there is something there. Maybe they are connected with each other somehow. How would they be connected? Well, he says, well, when you buy a lot of money for a ticket, yeah, it's a lot of money that you spend on that. Yeah? And then you watch a show, you better convince yourself that it was a great show because you spend a lot of money on it. Right? An example would be, you pay an awful amount of money for your education, for your degree. You better tell yourself this is the best university ever because you spend so much money on the degree, right? Actually, there's a theory behind that. It's called the theory of cognitive dissonance reduction, and we get to that in a second. But Jon Elster, he formulates his best possible explanation in this way. So now I'm quoting him. He says, I shall consider an explanation in terms of the rising prices of Broadway tickets. One newspaper reports the playwright, blah, 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 as saying, I guess the audience just feels having paid $75 to sit down, it's their time to stand up. I don't mean to be cynic, but it probably all changed when the price went up. When people have to pay $75 or more for a seat, many cannot admit to themselves that the show was poor or mediocre, and that they have wasted their money. To confirm to themselves that they had a good time, they applaud wildly. You have to give it to the guy. That's an interesting creative explanation, right? That's actually a pretty good one because it's actually based on other theories that we have out there. We'll come back to that in a second. So that's now his first step. He chose a theory that holds out the greatest promise of a successful explanation. So now the second step would be to specify a hypothesis that applies the theory to the puzzle in the sense that the explanandum follows logically from the hypothesis. So a theory is a general thing, right? It's very abstract. And then a hypothesis applies that to a specific case. If that is true, what would have to be true? So let's apply that to our setting of Broadway shows. Right? So that the explanandum follows logically from the hypothesis. What is the explanandum? The explanandum is more standing ovations. Right? That's sort of what follows out of our theory, if that is sort of the case applied in a hypothesis. What does he use to explain it? Well, increased ticket prices. So if you put the two together, the one would follow from the other. That's now a hypothesis. The hypothesis would be increased ticket prices lead to more standing ovations. Yeah? You see, this is sort of like this general idea about feeling bad about stuff you spend a lot of money on, broken down, put into a hypothesis that we then can actually go out and test. You know, and we find that, but now the problem is, well, we have so many other possible explanations for that. Maybe we do observe this relationship, yeah, that kind of people stand up more, and when they kind of, or that sort of number of standing ovations went up and the number of ticket prices went up. But that doesn't mean that we explained it yet. Yeah? Don't mix correlation with causation. Big mistake. There are still lots of other potential explanations for this. So how do we now go about distinguish these from each other? Well, now let's move to the third step that Jon Elster proposes. So he says, well, we should identify or imagine plausible accounts that might provide alternative explanations, also in the sense that the explanandum follows logically from each of them. Yeah? So actually, you need to come up with the best possible second explanation that you have, right? Because when you kind of can credibly knock that out, actually your argument for your best possible explanation becomes even stronger. Yeah? So you come up with alternatives, and that's what I meant earlier. A good sociologist sees a phenomenon, immediately comes up with lots of alternative explanations, and then tries to debunk each of them. So an alternative explanation that Jon Elster comes up with, he says, well, maybe it has to do with the audience nowadays. Maybe the audience is easier to impress than 20 years ago. Right? So maybe it is that the audience sort of widened, and nowadays Broadway show is not what it used to be 20 years ago, where only professors from Columbia, and I don't know, maybe NYU and I don't know, other universities in the area went. Nowadays every bloody tourist goes there because they got a cheap ticket to fly there and think going to a Broadway show is what you're supposed to do. Right? Or maybe it's sort of, actually Jon Elster, he describes it, maybe it's the folks from New Jersey. I hope nobody's here from New Jersey. But they are sort of, if you kind of understand what I mean here, you kind of get the point that this actually refers to a TV show that used to be big a couple of years ago. It's actually one of those weird TV shows that you start watching and you can't let go. Yeah? One of those shows that you feel guilty, but you have to press next. Yeah? It's like one of those Netflix things. You end and then, let's watch one more. Yeah? Just to see what happens. Yeah? Just to see. Great thing is, as a sociologist, you always have an excuse. So I can always say, in the name of research. But anyway, so the argument here is that people are easier to impress. The audience is easier to impress, and because of that, nowadays, there are more standing ovations. It's a credible explanation. It's actually not a bad one. Yeah? Well, he also has another explanation. So there you see, there are a couple of explanations that we need to think about. Actually, one pretty straightforward one could be, and maybe some of you guys came up with that as well, it could be that those shows got better, right? Could be. Maybe nowadays the shows are just of a higher quality. Maybe the production, chain just got better. If you look at TV series nowadays, they're all like little, cinema movies, It's like really, really high quality. So they don't look crappy anymore. And maybe something like that happened with Broadway shows too. That they became objectively better. It's another explanation that we have. You see, it could also explain why there are more standing ovations. It could be that shows just got better. It's another explainer. So we have now different sorts of things that we could use to explain our phenomena at the end of the day. So now he says for each one of these accounts, we should refute them by pointing to additional testable implications that are in fact not observed. And that's what he calls support from the side. So that means for each one of the alternatives that we came up with, we need to think about, okay, if that is actually true, then what else would have to be true? And when we kind of can show that this whatever else would have to be true is not true, it's actually a good sign that our original alternative explanation is not a good one. That means we could debunk that, which leaves us with our best possible explanations at the end of the day. That's what he calls support from the side, or lateral support. Let's play that through in the case of our Jersey Shore argument. Right? So here the alternative explanation is that different audiences are then nowadays there in Broadway shows, and because of that, you observe more standing ovations. Now you need to think about, okay, hang on, if that is true, if it is about the difference between, city people who are sort of like sophisticated and now people from the countryside, from New Jersey, kind of rolling in and going to those Broadway shows, if that is actually the explanation why there are more standing ovations nowadays, you could say, hang on a moment, if we would take, just assume we could do that, if we could take one of those Broadway shows on the road and we put it somewhere in the middle of Kansas. I hope nobody's here from Kansas. Yeah. But somewhere else in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Or imagine a county in Ireland that is in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And you would have a Broadway show over there. Right? Let's just play that out for a moment. If we could put it there, and it really is about the audience that goes to these shows, and then the show happens to be somewhere else where another set of people go to that show, then we should observe more standing ovations when we take that show onto the road and take it out of the inner city from Broadway, New York. Or another thing that would have to be true is, okay, if it is really about this Jersey argument, and Elsa makes a case for that, and that's sort of now a creative way of kind of getting towards these kind of things. You can think about, okay, in order to get from Jersey to New York, you have to get over the bridge, yeah, and maybe that Jersey bridge and bad weather is blocked for whatever reason, right? I don't know, there's snow, and sometimes it just happens. People cannot get over the bridge. It actually makes it difficult for people from Jersey to get into New York. So if it is about the audience, and if it is about a different kind of audience coming from Jersey or coming from the countryside into the city center, then on those days where there happened to be this natural experiment, where the bridge wasn't passable, right, where people couldn't get over, right, you wouldn't have had those people in the audience sitting there. In consequence, those people would not have stand up to clap with standing ovations. So in those days, there should be fewer standing ovations. Yeah? So that's how you see. And now if we don't find these two things, and now we can go out and I can look at how many people stand up and kind of relate it to the weather and kind of the blocking of the bridge between New Jersey and New York, for example. I don't find a relationship. Maybe I don't find a relationship between Broadway shows being on the road and the number of people that stand up. And if I don't find support for that, well, this alternative explanation starts looking pretty weak, right? Because that would have to be true for that to be true. So we can start knocking that out. Let's do the same thing with the quality arguments, right? So we could say it is about improved quality. So if that is the case, Elsa says, well, then actually the reviews of those Broadway shows should have gotten better over the years as well, right? If they objectively became better, and we accept now for a moment that a reviewer gives an objective critique of how good the show is. Or that shows should run longer if the quality got better. And again, if we can't find evidence for these kind of relationships, our alternative explanation starts to look pretty bad, and we can knock out this one as well. So you see how you actually have to jump through a whole lot of loops. We just had this original explanation about ticket prices related to standing ovations, but now we're talking about alternative explanations and what else would have to be true if our alternative explanation would be true. Yeah? And that's sort of how we can knock this one out as well. So the last point that Elsa says after kind of thinking about these rival accounts and knocking them out is to strengthen the proposed hypothesis by showing that it has additional testable implications, preferably of novel facts that are in fact observed. What does he mean by that? Well, that's something he calls support from below. Now he has support from the side, lateral support, that's his alternative stuff. Support from below is kind of thinking about, okay, we go back to our original explanation. If that is true, what else would have to be true? Yeah? Now we don't think about the alternative explanation, what else would have to be true for the alternative explanations, but what else would have to be true for our best possible explanation. So if that is the case, well, actually we should see fewer standing ovations for shows where the prices did not increase. What we should also observe is, well, once in a while you get these free tickets. Yeah? If you kind of go to a show and there are a lot of free tickets being given out there, so that, I don't know, it doesn't look completely empty, but it also means people didn't pay that much money for it. And if our theory is true, they shouldn't feel bad about it because they didn't pay any money to begin with. So they have no reason to kind of trick themselves into saying and thinking that this is the best show ever, right? So in these cases, we should then also observe fewer standing ovations. So if we would find evidence for these two things, and that's support from below, our possible explanation starts looking pretty strong. And at the end, with this process of kind of thinking about what else would have to be true for your alternative explanations and for your actual best possible explanations, you at the end have the last man standing, or the last woman standing, and that's your best possible explanation. Lastly, Elster says there's not just support from the side, alternative explanation, support from below. What else would have to be true for the real one? But there's also what he calls support from above. Support from above. What is support from above? Well, we have here our relationship, our explanation that we think of, and now support from above would be something like this. Now, actually, there's a pretty good theory out there that explains this kind of stuff. It has been shown in many different contexts. It's called the theory of cognitive dissonance reduction by Leon Festinger, social psychologist. Basically, the idea is your brain kind of encounters one of these mental dissonances where something just doesn't really fit, where your beliefs and values are in conflict with each other somehow, and then you try to reduce that dissonance through a process of mental readjustment. Yeah? And that would mean like you change either the one or the other. And explanations for that would be, do they have an explanation? Explanations would be, for example, you know that smoking is bad, yeah, but you smoke. So this is in conflict with each other. I don't know, smoking gives me cancer, but I'm sorry, yeah, still smoke. Yeah? But there you have this dissonance in your head. And one way of kind of reducing that is tricking yourself into telling yourself that smoking is actually not that bad. Yeah. People die of lots of other things too. Or another one would be, you know that lying is bad, but you're forced to lie. And then what we actually really observe is that sometimes people start believing in their own lie. Again, it's like this process of reducing that dissonance, solving that with a mental readjustment, that dissonance that you have. So that's what he calls support from above. There's a little comic about that. There's this guy who asks in a job interview, why should I have you as my consultant? And then the guy says, well, I use my special process of cognitive dissonance to improve employee morale. And then how does it work? Well, okay, the guy goes ahead and explains it, but then later on he approaches this other guy, says, isn't it strange that you have this dead-end job when you are twice as smart as your boss? And then he says, the hours are long, the pay is bad, and so on and so forth. That's kind of really odd. That kind of creates this dissonance. I'm in this job, but it's shitty paid. I went through 15 years of education to stand here. It's a long way. Yeah. Why the hell am I doing this? Yeah. It's absurd. And then the guy says, well, hang on a moment. It's because I love my work. This could be one of those processes of adjusting, of solving that mental adjustment that we have. Anyway, so at the end you have your last man standing. This is sort of like a possible explanation. You come about it in the hypothetical deductive model in three ways, with support from the side, thinking about alternative explanations and kind of thinking what else would have to be true if those would be true, and try to refute that, right? So that the one that you actually had is the last one standing. You can have support from below, which is if my original explanation is true, what else would have to be true? And support from above, which is do we find similar phenomena in other contexts? In the case of cognitive dissonance, it's been shown so many times in so many different contexts that this is a process that actually happens, right? Actually, it's the same thing when you buy an expensive car. You buy an expensive car and afterwards you tell yourself, oh, this is the best car ever, because you just spent a fortune on it. I'm doing the thing with my apartment at the moment, because I spent a fortune on it, so I tell myself it's the best apartment ever. Which probably is. Anyway, so here we are. So for Thursdays, you guys have a reading by Bickel and others. This is now, for those of you who are in the second year, this is now really like a paper from Science. Right? This is like the journal that we have out there, but you can totally read it. It's an older text. You find it on Blackboard. See you on Thursday.